오, 내 배배급 좋은 아바당, 들이 자작하라지고, 잡으려게, 좁보는 어들이 자시 델렉쇼이, 산지 그 삼바 세미에서, 진지 오마, 들이다가 상마로 삽제게 초반부, 자시 델렉.
Dashidele to all my guests who have come here today, and also all my friends joining us on the live stream from all over the world. And I'm offering you this milk tea of loving kindness, or immeasurable loving kindness and compassion from the Buddha's begging bowl. So I'm offering you a great loving kindness, Dashidele to all of you.
아까당 주도하는 말이다. 남편 기록된 팀으로 인지마가 고니들이 냠들이가 제타봐. 대송발이 내 강리 산지 탑락해 봐서 내가 산지를 탑들이 이따다 바로도서 막 조국 칼라들이 산지게 탑다 또다 몰람 이시송 그때 산지를 바로도서 맞죠? 창을 때 들면들이 내려들어서 탑 강리들이 탑다 삼제들이 다 샘들이 우리 때들이 다들 삼제들이 샘들 냠들 선조 족보족보 삼제들이 이렇게 망도 똥탑 체로 똥탑 대 따뜻한 배출로 때는 사제를 때는 결국 삼제를 때는 대 삼제들이 망도 똥아 체로 똥아 탑 따라니 거는 되게 담배출로 기록 탐지 자체 뭐 말이 가래 삼지 치려도 마음탑 탑지 바테레 얘들이 제지 뒤서 무슨 세나세 제 탑이데 진짜 뒤서 가리 제냥 얘네 피부 탑 얘네 피부도 삼지데 내가 랑게 삼지데 치러 줘가 탑 얘네 들이 얘네 랑 이거 피리요래 얘네 제 탑도 바로 나서 이 말이 배야 세대 초대 바라나서 상승지 바래 왜서 가리치스 세지 피고도 살 디스면 되게 그래 낭낭 상태에 제일 좋고요 얘들이 다 단다고 사킨 나디는 네 소데드 뭐남서 요리 디나 간그 삼당 얘기 쳐들래 사지 그 삼태에 가리들이 잠도 침보다 버려서 내 가리지 지금 다 삼체 생분은 삼체가 초와다 하고래 내 모아다 모나면 뛰네 세다 모나면 이시리들 모나면 뛰네들이 삼체에 찔도 뒤 얘네들이 이시를 모나면 찔도 뒤들이 이시를 보통으로 이시지 받을 가리들 생분 내놓게 코바 통만에 반을 나지 박차 랍라고 되들이 별로 더신성자적으로 똘똘고 말이 The trees with the doctor, W Sakami later or Tono, Danji to the doctor, Nadi Tom Maton, the Doggy, Tartoko, Yomari. There is the Sarchuk said the social, the Tower Garchen Rinpoche John Deba, Tower Danji, the Rejancha for it. The Elis Moyarama. We thought the Sarchuk of the Tondo, some. There is that Papa means ever coming. Semi Sarchuk said the Papa, Rabbi, she's a Papa, some. Semi Sarchuk said the Papa, the Danji, the Torona. Rabbi, she's a Papa, they said they're taking more. 甚至唐最了产业的教育话题，当然往头了嘞。别讲哦，甚至上天长老味的，长老的学的讲做了天龙鬼了嘞。这里讲做了都没有嘛嘞，马拉用的都没有嘛，哪这里，谁个内陆是不搞啥，他们就搞的讲不到了嘞。这他把这边多呢送了，他亲别说讲做了是，讲的嘞。 특파 전부라 가 특파 전부 이제 카르제 그러니 카르제는 소소 특파는 뭐라는 게 따고래 오 뭐 샘도 잡으려고 피고 샘도 샘도 잡소나기죠 오 특파 전부지 로섭데 잡소다고 얘나 다주 특파 전부래 특파 총을 빠지쳐 특파 총도 저 가리 총총이지 샘 총총이 샘 총총이 가리 되더니 마치 Samantiri rangi kasi samantiri rangi nema rangi chulung ngana chulung tiri rangi deta chunga tiri rangi data chung tiri data yin dama ngore da chipte che kore yin dama ramji ngore tiri mke orang chulung ngore seka kiwa tiri data sanchuk sebde di kangi samta kiji chotel le song sanje ke samba semi te yamso tawa di samba semi te la 토마 들이 되게 추사 쪽세고 대연에 다다다 뒤랑 속대 다 잡을거다 개두인바디 졸업성물이 오 첫째보지 지금 매도만건 총거려래 얘는 잡을래 대다 개베시 미zam보 대시리가 빵다리 인터미 대탐지 토를 가래도 이 세로 가래도 따거리 오 뒤서로 삼제요 그랬지 타바로 삼제요 십대고 그랬지 이 사람은 돈지 사마다 사족세인지 이 미디 세는 산속세묘데 다티 망도 좀 때를 대턱고 들이 사와 탑제들이 상제는 더턱고 상제디 체로 동통고 망도 동통고 그게 뭐 차고 성 이렇게 다 붙여놓기는 이제 이 말로가 되네 다 도나래 이 말로가 대화 중에 상제에서 갖다 뒤고대다 양대는 쉬와리 이 시스템들이 다 붙여놓기 이 말로 가리 제네 그래서 좀 대화가 차은 거예요 이 맛이나 이 맛이 가리대. 이실 레주브레 하고서는지. 레주브레 가리대. 오저 사초 세우는 레베데와 토크요레지. 저 단지는 동행 정도요레. 그 단지의 강 쳐서고 들면 봐도 탑. 내려지는 다 붙여고 따르래. 갖다 뒤코대다 쉬와예. 내려지는 무슨 저기 고대 가래를 도와를 참아디 고추들에 내와 고요레. 내가 저 가래 다 내가 다다다 삼제리 드블 드블 드리티 꿀랑 탑제 세버 탑 데르 삼제 더버 탑 데 노고는 좀 뭐만 잡고 탑 데송 거요래 디디 고마가 데서 쉬요랑 가가시시 남농은 뜨니 쉬요래 드리티 쉬요래
And so yesterday, Dharma friends, I spoke about how to be very skillful in whatever we do when we engage in any activity, whether it's a Dharma activity or a mundane activity. So I spoke about how we can actually combine and bring them together. And the Buddha was very skillful in his teachings. So the Buddha taught first the 6 paramitas, and then we also mentioned yesterday on top of that there is 4 additional paramitas, the paramitas of method, of power, of prayer, and of primordial wisdom. So the Buddha taught the 10 paramitas, or within the Buddha the 10 paramitas are complete. And so within those paramitas, we have the paramita of method. So what is the method? The method is love. Love is our only true friend, the friend that we have in our mind. And so the method is the way in which we increase our love. So we increase our love by practicing the Dharma through the Buddha's teachings or through any religion. There's really no other method to increase our love. And that is why all the different religions are very precious. So that is what we mean with method. And Lord Jigten Sumgön said that if you act, then do so skillfully or applying methods. No matter what you do, whether you practice Dharma or engage in a worldly activity, the method is to benefit others. The method is to increase your love. And if your love increases, you will actually benefit others naturally. Also, Milarepa said, aside from practicing virtue in whatever you do, there is no other perfection of method than that. So what Milarepa and Jigten Sumgön said are basically the same thing. Whatever you do, just think, may this benefit sentient beings. And in this way, your love will always increase. In an aspiration prayer of the fivefold path of Mahamudra, it says in the beginning that the immeasurable love and compassion of those Buddhas is like a water-like treasure. And so what is meant by that is that the love of all the Buddhas is as vast as an ocean, a vast ocean. This feeling of love is immeasurable. And then the Buddha also performs prayer for sentient beings with this love. And with prayer, the Buddha brings it all into one, all those beings with great love into one. And then through such gathering of this kind of bringing together with love, then we develop primordial wisdom, or the paramita of primordial wisdom. So what is primordial wisdom? Now, since beginningless time, we have wandered in samsara, and our mind is obscured by the habitual tendency of self-grasping. And throughout all this time, it has become as large as a mountain. And it's very difficult to get rid of self-grasping. Even the most powerful atomic bomb in this world could not destroy it. Such a bomb could destroy the entire world easily, but it can't destroy self-grasping. And for as long as self-grasping is not destroyed, we will not be able to avoid suffering. We have to get rid of self-grasping. And so the way we get rid of self-grasping from the perspective of the view is the weapon of intrinsic awareness, or the view, which is also mentioned in the Vajrakilaya practice. And in the Vajrakilaya practice, we speak about the kila, the purva of immeasurable, boundless compassion, and then the purva, or the kila, of wisdom awareness. So it is compassion and awareness that destroy self-grasping. And when self-grasping is destroyed, we truly actualize the wisdom awareness kila. And so what we really realize then is Buddha nature. All sentient beings possess Buddha nature. And when it is actualized, Buddha nature attains freedom. For example, sentient beings' mind is like an ice block, and when the ice melts, it becomes one with the ocean. And the ocean doesn't suffer. Even though there are waves on the ocean doesn't suffer. And so the mind of someone who has realized their true nature is like such an ocean, like water. In the Great Liberation Sutra, it says, the mind of a Mahayana mind is like a vast ocean. And so we say, I'm a Mahayana practitioner. But you have to see for yourself whether you are truly a Mahayana practitioner. So when you look at your mind and you find that I really want to benefit all beings in the world, I want everyone to be happy, then your mind is really like a vast ocean and you really are a Mahayana practitioner. And then the second part of the quote of that sutra says, and the mind of one of the lower vehicle is like the water collecting in the footprint of a cow. So it is very small compared to the ocean. And so what is small is the scope of the mind. It is small because this mind can only think about themselves. They think, for example, this is my religion, this is my home, this is my family, and so on. So they take ownership of everything and call it mine. And when we do that, then naturally an aversion against others arises. So once we only wish for our own happiness, we will develop a resentment against others naturally. And then even if we practice virtue, it already is partially non-virtuous. So this water-like treasure is the immeasurable love of all the Buddhas. And that is why we first go for refuge in the Buddhas. Then once we have taken refuge, we practice the Dharma, which is to cultivate bodhicitta. And then one becomes an embodiment of that as a Sangha. And there are many excellent Sangha members in the world. For example, from, again, a source of great water, many flowers can grow. So just like that, there are many excellent spiritual masters in this world, many good human beings in this world. And their mind has something in common, and that is they all have great love and they want peace and happiness for all. So they possess a mind of bodhicitta. And so it is this mind of love that we take and then increase. We need to increase this love by applying it in all of our activities. If you practice this in everything you do, your love will increase and it becomes stable eventually. And that is really the Dharma, the purpose of the Dharma. But also in a mundane sense, human beings, people want to be happy. And if they want to be happy, they need to develop love. So this is what I've been speaking about yesterday. And if you understand all of that, then you will understand karma in whatever you do, whether you practice the Dharma or engage in a mundane activity. And so what really is karma? We mentioned that yesterday. If you possess the cause of bodhicitta in your mind, you will experience happiness as a result. If there is self-grasping in your mind, you will experience suffering as a result. So therefore, it is important in all activities that we do what we can to eliminate self-grasping from our mind. And for that purpose, actually, the Dharma really has spread. So this is what I spoke about yesterday a little bit. And so to summarize, all the sentient beings in the 6 realms of samsara want to be happy. So they need to find or create the cause of happiness, and that is love. And that is something that needs to be practiced in everything we do, in all of our activities. And that is called the method, or being skillful. So the method is to practice, or being skillful means to practice love in all your activities. And then through the power of aspiration, prayer, we increase this love. And so whatever I have shared with you are just words that really come from my own personal experience.
Sankhitamde Deva Dopata, the Mema Dopate, Samari, said a sort of Tumsong, Deva Dokoyori, Deva Dopata, the Mema Dopine. The Maduva Tablet, the Gate, Bang, the Tapter, Bang Tokoyo, Mari, Delta, Sati Tondi, Shirabratine, 오, 동네에 접하고 동네 접마방은 제가 방야요 말이야. 야가마 야가 메세 착도 메기와 시에세우나 이래서 다 미고데 제게밥을 유모버다라고 세비 단디에 돌아래. 나 대고 나 야고서 들리지는 족족지 다 먹이 있었대. 내가 단디를 들을 저기요리. 저 자리들 랑을 저 자리들 바로 뭐 샘집바는 들랑을 돌랑을 돌아랑을 설 미고요리. 사지 대하고는 저랑 담지 저래서 되게 쪼고 그래서 동이 고고를 주다다가 동이까지 내가 또 다도 동이 더 쪼고 그래서 쪼고를 쪼가래 저 말을 봐야지 동이에 저래서 동이 저 맛이 동이 저다 단지래 단지의 요다 매다 딱지 땅만 요 말이 사지 다 매발라 다도 정말 다 가리도 주랑 세우나 삼대가 뒤때는 막 차면 뭐 싸우면 됐다 나오냐 뭐 차를 때다 도와도 소설이 유모 차를 때들이 등에 메인 거래 얘들이 저거리 저상 접선들 나오냐 봐도 라고래 나오냐 봐도 유매 딱 제다 나오냐 봐가리 요 말이지 다 용말 이용을 생각나 하나게 다 동담을 마사지 하고 오 동담을 생각만 상장인 바텔라 다 강에서도 나지 보고 싸우는 들이는 정말 나인도 받을 들이들이 남진이 오지 들이들이 다 랑의 피부들이 이노 와사다 들이들이 되길 다 버려 다 도와를 동대 갑차디 도와를 동대 다도 저렇게 저런다기 문에도 참을 거야 하고는 오 동담사 저청 하고서는 오 대통령이 좀 왔다 그래 저 하고 두고요 그래 이 저렇게 저 방송을 대담제 매화변나 누가를 또 저소소한테 유명 쪽에서 유명한 쪽에 시비 총총총총 때 하고서 오 유명한 쪽에 유명한 쪽에 나디도 찾아도 다들 나디의 파요가래 샘직 바는 일 피고 살이 로데 제체 매바우나 내가 제체 탐제변을 거 내가 동문적으로 타통 대비 저리 그래서 출렁 탐제 저리서 못해 그래서 사제가 좀 되는 파우지 람가 대리들이 따뜻하면서 가는 로가도 대화도 많이 가까죠. 오, 되게 사지게 몰람장지 샘기 탐지 샘데 오니 대화다 대화 가리도 주를 가리고 나 대화고 대화들 저도 요래서 저 가리 따삼지래서 동해들 강에 좀 딱히 당시 동해가 강에 좀 동해 어고지 동해 눈에 먹어지 동해가 저 다지래서 저기 이제 나 가서 때는 동담을 되마다 나요 말이야 다 사지 시작을 오다 매발 나도 내박 잡는 거 속에서 상은 사지게 동담 나 매발 남상 통통을 말때 나도 이피를 놓고 다 버렸어 저놈들이 막 쇼거래 들이다 상속선 다 줄랑 상속선 배우나 달라 탐지 때려서들이 이피를 놓고지 일랑도 되는 나를 거당 거발 조송 그래서 말이 일랑도 가리 나 동해 있고 생기 탐지 동해 있고 상 나 동해 있고 상 이거 동해 있고 말이 내가 동해 소속이요 그래서 생기 탐지 피는 것은 나 뜻이 파색도 나 뜻이도 저 동해 좀 내가 안지 뜻이었어 이 대레들이 다 산지가 람상보 됐더니 뜻하다 그 가리나 따뜻하다 비추초가 람탐지 사족선마디 소탈레 이노 이제 빵고스 사족선마가 이피 이제 적고 내 이피 이제 돌아 다주 왜데 다 이니 얼마 생각나 차롬데 셔서나 차롬데 저기 카카 말이지 다 사지에 동답을 해 봐대서나 차롬데 랑그 주에 다지는 나인도한테 그 마대 동답을 셈비 사지에 카카 말이지 셈비 남는 산지에 운자로 그러면서 책에서 이 좀내 고시네 이랬더니 다지 주적이 사와 강 옛날에 인피당대로 고니 내가 있어서 아까에 개발해서 다지 조집에 답을 추럭들 잡는 내 기와도 기와니는 지마해시 기와도 지마는 추르 대화도 좀 지마요 그래서 다때서 말해야지
And so that is what we all share in common. All sentient beings want to be happy, and no one wants to suffer. Even the smallest animal wants the same thing and does not want to suffer. But just because we don't want to suffer, that wish alone is not enough for us to avoid suffering. We still suffer. So the Buddha, with his great wisdom, gave us a method to overcome suffering. And so he said that in order to overcome suffering, you have to abandon the cause of suffering. You can't abandon or avoid the result of suffering when it's already ripened. You must abandon it from the root. You must abandon the cause of suffering. So it is because in previous lives you have engaged in many non-virtuous actions, such as killing and stealing and abusing others, that now you experience certain kinds of sufferings. That is the result. And all of these negative actions come from our afflictive emotions. And all of these afflictive emotions come from self-grasping. We basically think that I want this is how I want it, and I will get it even at the cost of other people's pain. And so then they bring others down in order to get what they want. And so the 10 non-virtuous actions, therefore, are really created through the mind. And then once created, it also ripens on ourselves. And so everyone's mind is the same in this regard. And this is what the Buddha, with his great wisdom, had realized. And so the Buddha also said that all phenomena arise from causes. You don't want to suffer. So if you want to eliminate suffering, you have to eliminate the causes of suffering. And what is the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is ignorance. It is self-grasping. So self-grasping is the ultimate cause of all of our suffering. All of our karma, our actions come from that. And this is what ordinary people don't understand. So the Buddha taught that so once you understand that it's all because of self-grasping, next look at that self. Does it really exist? So the Buddha said there is no real self that actually exists. There are no real sentient beings, no real Buddhas. So now you think me, there's this I, and that is because of a strong habitual imprint in your mind, a habitual tendency. You think that there is this me. And this is how we then wander in samsara, and how we develop all the coarse and subtle afflictive emotions. And they lead to perpetual suffering. If you just cultivate bodhicitta, then this thought of me is lost. So really investigate your own mind. Look at your own mind and see that there is no real self, no me. And there is also no other. This is what the Buddha realized when he saw the ultimate truth. And so when your mind becomes completely pure, you see the ultimate truth. So right now, not seeing that, what we want is to be happy. So we think that I want to be happy. So first there's this self-clinging. And then we want to get whatever we think we need, and often at the cost of harming others. We engage in many non-virtuous actions in order to get what we want. And then as a result of that, temporarily, we wander in samsara. We are like a water bubble or something that now solidifies in the water, as we are not free-flowing water. Then once you realize bodhicitta, or the ultimate bodhicitta, then you realize that all of this is illusory. When you have abandoned the cause, everything, all suffering disappears. So right now, the 6 realms of samsara arise from the 6 afflictive emotions. And it is necessary, it's important that we recognize each of those subtle afflictive emotions as they arise in our mind. And then recognize that all of these emotions come from self-grasping. So I have to let go of self-grasping. And when you let go of self-grasping, our minds are actually all the same. If you cultivate an altruistic mind that wishes to benefit others on an ongoing basis, then whatever you do becomes skillful means. And that is the cause of temporary and ultimate happiness. So the Buddha realized that all phenomena arise from causes, and realizing that, he gave us this excellent path. And within samsara now we experience happiness and suffering both. So when the Buddha taught the Dharma, so he said, basically it's like a dialogue, and the Buddha said to sentient beings, so what do you want? Then sentient being says, I want to experience happiness. So if you want to be happy, then you have to create the cause of happiness. Now, what's that cause of happiness? The cause of happiness is love. And what do you not want? I don't want to suffer. But where does all your suffering come from? Think about it. And then when you really look at it, you will find that the root cause of all suffering is self-grasping. So when you go into this dialogue and the Buddha asks you, so do you want to suffer? You say that that's not what I want at all. So you have to therefore see what causes all of your suffering. So you see it's the self, and then once you see that, you are guided to the ultimate truth, to realize that this self does not actually exist. The Buddha said that you falsely believe in the existence of a self due to habitual imprints from the past. But when you look at it, you actually can see the self. And so you get to that realization by cultivating an altruistic mind, because this is what first purifies your mind. Or it's like the sun that melts the ice block. So therefore the Buddha said, cultivate bodhicitta, altruism, in whatever you do. And also he said that in order to accomplish your own purpose, you have to accomplish the purpose of others. Striving to accomplish your own purpose will actually be counter-effective, will cause the opposite. So we suffer and we don't want to suffer. The way to rid ourselves from suffering is not by the wish to be free from our own suffering, but it is through the wish of benefiting others and liberating them from suffering. And if you're able to do that, if you only think about how can I benefit others, then you will liberate yourself from suffering naturally. And so that is because self-grasping then diminishes just naturally. So this is the excellent path that the Buddha had given us. First, there is the path of the individual liberation or pratimoksha, and here the Buddha taught that you must abandon harming others entirely. And then on the bodhisattva path, the Buddha taught you must accomplish the benefit of others completely. And then, as a result, you realize that self and other are not separate, because then the ice block is melting, and you realize it has never really been separate from water. Ice is water. And this is then when the Buddha taught the ultimate truth. The Buddha said, you are creating your own ice blocks by grasping at the self, through your fixations in the mind. You are making your own ice block. Actually, in reality, the Buddha said, Buddhas and sentient beings are not separate. So the Buddha said, within all beings is the Buddha, or all beings are actually Buddhas. They are only obscured by adventitious stains. When these stains are removed, they are actual Buddhas. So therefore, we should think that in whatever I do, and whether it's the Dharma or a worldly activity, I must never separate from the altruistic mind. And then whatever you do becomes a virtuous practice. And so that is really the most important thing that we have to keep in mind when we practice the Dharma, because otherwise we might practice the Dharma or any religion, but if we do so without being able to let go of this grasping in our mind, we will still continue to practice non-virtue. So we will kind of accumulate a mix of virtue and non-virtue. And that is why we experience a mix of happiness and suffering.
Lama Sisula gave you Sisula, the day upon song, the songs of a king the Datagory, don't kill the Datagory. The song got same man in the liquor. Chupong jetted yet on Sawasa took 730. Chuju Pombo jetted yet on Mambo, really jetted on Mambo your it. They tell me Careso. Just down the inner Devon number, that's what the Lima, that's the main number, that's what you was just down the took the hammer or the Oh, the neighbor is that they do the Joe, the daddy of Hakoso, that don't get our Hakos. The power top mount jars on that sort of mass of Mammo, be mount out of Takaji. Married, top thing about the word. Joe was on the peace and sure, I need a year big also the lot about the Madonna, Dactari. Now was I gave it to the world. That's the how Hako to bury. I should load of time on board, don't you know? That don't go that how I should think about our Hako. Now, what I gave it to the check chimbo you. Put the Hakos on the Daddy, some Hako to be oh, better try that you don't talk on that. Oh, Cordelia Hako Talibella. Oh, Kovakari, Komark oh, Sadikari, Sadrak Nero Toma Tonki Barret. Simply they look on what the Sangi is. Simply they look at it, not thought of the same correctly. They are Shiako. That is Kadiba Sachi, Nima Zochi song. The long to repeat the woman Tawa, men's of Tayo, the Gigi woman, like a Tawa Hakona, Khenpo some the married Tokoto, same correct Tawa, men take your berries. Now calling them Mayo Maras. Same now calling each other. Then a Gemini bears on the told out with the Bacari, told out with the button now cut our race. Same now cut shape very too long to divide. Same now calling child Hako, same with the look Hako, same now calling it. Then I touch you on to me, to the Hako, don't get up to talk to her. They looked at your call, that is now called that girl. The Banamata of the Magina, Lay Masala, not on the Manata of the Bayo Mariso. Titera, got up with them a lay to get enough power, told them with them, some Congrassi that told them with the Bareso. They went Namasaje, but shooting out the Nishina. Put the Hakos on the Tamki Hakos already. There are Tamki, she, the Saji Tondi, the comes from Sabasum, Saji Shirap the part of the Sabaso. They get it. The Mato, what the talk of the break and road, the doctor couldn't job, that being no drama, what they gave out the given them, the Banato Sheton. The Joya, your married. They told my watch harder. They tell me she you dearly the Palman dog along bay. The Shigor, Hako, for that one is the Jim Hill or Tuku, nothing. Tarangal, I saw something. Rangla paper that Yena, they are so. What does he bring a lorry song? But what they might get touched, it them.
So the Buddha said that although the mind is the same, the mind of all beings is the same, temporarily sentient beings in the 6 realms of samsara must experience unbearable suffering. But how can we liberate those sentient beings from suffering? How can we become free? It is through the 2 truths that the Buddha taught. It's important to understand the meaning of these 2 truths, the relative and the ultimate. On the ultimate level, the Buddha said that sentient beings and Buddhas are not separate, they are one. Temporarily, on the relative level, sentient beings experience a lot of suffering. In the Samantabhadra prayer explains how this suffering arises. It explains that the cause of all suffering of beings is self-grasping. From self-grasping, the 6 afflictive emotions arise, and with an afflicted mind, we engage in all sorts of negative actions. And mainly, we engage in these actions because we consider ourselves as most important. In the 37 practices, there are just these 2 lines that we mentioned yesterday, that all suffering comes from wishing for one's own happiness. The perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. Actually, if you just understand that and keep that in mind, it is sufficient. And that is what all these spiritual masters around the world are teaching when they turn the wheel of the Dharma. So we have to be skillful in knowing how to bring it all to a single essence. There are many different disciples and many different kinds of disciples that need to be tamed in different ways. And therefore there is a myriad amount of teachings. There are 84,000 Dharma teachings, but it is said they all are included within bodhicitta. The essence of the 84,000 teachings is bodhicitta. If one elaborates on these teachings, the 84,000 teachings can be combined with each other, and they each have an 84,000-fold subdivision. So there's really endless teachings. But what are they all speaking about? They all speak about the relative and the ultimate truth. So on the relative level, the cause of all suffering is self-grasping. As a result of that, we experience all kinds of suffering. So it is just that people get confused because they don't understand the simple essence. All suffering comes from wishing for one's own happiness. Once you understand just that, you have understood the very root of all suffering. Otherwise, you might think that there is just too many methods. There's all these teachings, and there are all methods to abandon suffering. It is all just too much. For example, there is the 3 levels of the path of Pratimoksha, the Bodhisattva, and the Vajrayana vehicle, and they don't know what to practice, where to really start with all these teachings. So don't see them in this way. Just see their essence. The perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. That's it. You just need to want to benefit others. If you never separate from that wish, it is actually enough. And this is how we understand the Buddha's teachings properly. And if you understand them properly, actually it becomes very easy. It just becomes complicated if you don't really understand them properly. And then you might even spend decades studying the Dharma without ever really understanding the real point, the real root of Dharma practice. And so this simple essence is actually a special feature of the Buddha Dharma. In the Dharma, it is taught that if you understand the meaning of one, you can understand the meaning of everything. For example, it is said when you realize Mahamudra, you realize everything in samsara and nirvana. Because what essentially is samsara? Samsara is ignorance. What is nirvana or a Buddha is someone who has realized the nature of their mind, someone who sees their mind. And that's the only difference really between samsara and nirvana, having or not having seen the nature of the mind. So one who sees the nature of the mind is a Buddha. So then what's the nature of the mind? It's the state that is completely free of all concepts, of all thoughts, and the awareness that sees, it's the awareness that sees that's thought, its own thought-free state. And in the Kagyu tradition, it is referred to as Mahamudra. In the Nyingma tradition, it is referred to as Dzogchen. In the tradition of the scriptures and logical reasoning, it is referred to as the middle way, or Madhyamaka. So it has these three names. But Lord Jigten Sumgön had said that when one who has truly realized the view, the nature of mind, they remain untouched by those three great names, meaning like Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and Madhyamaka. Meaning that the mind has no name. We transcend all these concepts, these names. Space has no name really, that it has no label to it. And mind is like space. Also Milarepa, when he taught the ultimate truth, he said, when you realize that your mind is like space, you have realized the Dharmakaya. When you realize the nature of your mind, experience is space-like. And then you see that space, this space-like nature, transcends birth and death. And that within this nature there is no suffering. So by seeing it, you become liberated from suffering. That is, if you do not grasp at the many clouds appearing in that sky. If you do not grasp at the passing clouds in the sky, you will not accumulate any karma. If there is no karma accumulated, no suffering will ripen. So this is how we understand first the relative truth, the truth on karma. And then the ultimate truth teaches that, and the nature of that suffering that ripens through karma is actually empty. It lacks true existence. So this is how someone who knows how to practice the Dharma properly sees it. By knowing one thing, everything is known. And this is also how the Buddha had achieved or realized this omniscient wisdom. The omniscient wisdom of the Buddha sees everything. We call it the three planes or three samsaric existences. He sees everything through the perfection of wisdom. But until we have realized that ourselves, we follow the relative truth on karma. And so this term relative, actually, the Tibetan term is Guntsop. And Guntsop actually implies something that is troublesome, something that is like distorted and like deceiving, something that is deceptive and troublesome. And so the relative level is troublesome because we experience all kinds of happiness and suffering as a result of virtue and non-virtue. So the results coming from our actions are really endless. So it's very complex on the relative level. But then again, if one understands that, one can understand the simple way of achieving liberation from all one's suffering. And so basically on the relative level there is a method for each of the afflictions. Ultimately, however, if we only have love, if we only have an altruistic mind, then all of that is accomplished naturally, because then whatever you do with body, speech, or mind will be to your own benefit and will bring happiness to others. And so that is all accomplished only through the altruistic mind. And so the Buddha first taught the two truths, and so this is how we should understand them.
들이 대하고 들이 동이 제시 동이 빼는 매주 마치 강로 동이 나타다 강에 동이 제되나 이 동다 서로다 오마게 되게 저들 저되게 나타도 나타 사고래시 오 이게 되고 딱이 오래 좀 저들이 먼저 사지 탐제라들이 거다 대다운 양들들이 동이 이제 동이 때 덕덕이 착생이 되나 동이 대화를 저들이 동이들 남상만 나타나면 바테는 말이야 동이 동가래 동이 저 홀 나사대 요나티 나사대 나니 자고 그래 내들 자고 그래 동이 내 사자리 용고 그래 용거리 때 용이 되게 다도 그래 동이들 덕덕이 착생이 좀 죽게 되는도 하고 요새는 동이 요로 동이 되게 왔다 요래시 강내 동이들 덕덕이 착생이 좀 동이 짜치머리 좀 들이 동이들 양도 저래 되네 로를 도서스 동이들 동이 짜와까리 유모 바토케시 대 하고서 사네 들이 유모 바토케까지 다 바로 도서 바토 양실랑게 되게 유모 바토케 잡아주고 요래 대들 오 취시 받에 대리시 라게 취지 봐 절고 요래시 다지디 로디 전에 yin 피고 설 로디서 다데 치러서 들이 동네 요사 저 치로 다 매봐라 다도가 강보 다데 저기요 말이 다들랑 저요 나오 냐마들 자오르 능거리 다들은 다 톡다 나의 르들이 다속 세면대로 도도잖아 이런 가오냐 바트려요레스 사지에 대랑이 차그럼 자오레스 이 쇼거리 동네 말이 다데도 그래 용서 동네 참체에서 나디리 조용하래 조건 상지 인피 세면 총라리 소되면서 인피가 로되는 차그럼도 가래 파파파 쇼도고요래 내가 동네 요는 동네 되게 라게 레이박차 상조를 하고 동네 되게 작성이 변나 대하고서는 네 성성의 제나 양 성성의 동네 용나 오 야와야다 돌로서데 조차 시당 떠먹서로 레테리 대박차 되게 세면 차그럼도 차송 대쇼로 요래 대쇼가로 들이 동네 요래 그래 사저들이 되게 레좀 대샤고 하고 들이대는 종타들이 동네 매번 대화 정도 동네 탑재 대화해야지 나가 나타나는 다도 요래 동네 되게 뒤에서 뭐제대로 동네 가래 용나 동네 되라고 레사자도라고 상도 요래서 하고서 사나 답을 주는 거 짜치 보이면 봐 되게 동네 봤다고 탑을 가래지 따서 동네 나디네서 다지들 론드레서 다들 촉자다 인피를 얻어 정들이 차로 저리를 랑기한 거 전에 조고 사지지 미세면 정데 사제시 바가래 차로인데 랑기 차로인데 저리 잡소리 템성시 내가 참아서 랑그 세들 랑 상지에서 마도 사제게 조제서 사제 랑대서 레 랑대서 마도 사제게 가이들 가이세 마도 예를 들어 사제게 쇠와 집이 랑대네 이 소소 때가 저를 그래서도 동네로 자그럼식으로 잡소로 탐송데 오다 산제군이 중요한 독스 산제 상마제를 세피는 동행군이 독스 누구에도 썩어져도 랑랑한 지독스 썩어도 나디게 지독스 하고 따들이 동네말이 다된 노래죠 그러니까 따도도 일피로 세비를 피고 썰리로 어떻게 막라와지 하고 들라만으로 어떻게 하고 요래 내려들이 다다다 가리는 주탑식 있는 볼라니 소들마디 니는 마디 까요서도 걸요 말이 니는 저 뒤시는 좀 뛰어봐도 요 말이 대하고 대다오면들이 레좀 비슷도 서블었다라 하고는 동네 탑재 대화를 동네 매번 대화 쳐보지 동네 싸우면 유모모 제 동네 대요 말이 남카로 동네 요 말이 빼대다지 요야 요래시 다들 동네 매번 대화 쳐보지 요야 요래서 요리 샘도 남파냐도 대서 남파를 동네 가요 엄마가 오 상계시 봐도 동네 매번 대화 쳐보네 요사래시 이시게 또 그래 대도 남파 상계에 까디는 뒤는 대도 고특별히 해야지
So we should look at ourselves and try to understand our own mind. And on a relative level, it means to first gain a certainty in karma. Because Lord Thich Nhat also said that if no real certainty in karma has arisen, then speaking of the like empty nature of phenomenon is just a lie. So first we need to trust karma, and then we will find a way to achieve happiness and to avoid suffering. We will gain freedom to create our own happiness. And for that we must understand karma first. People experience all sorts of suffering. For example, some people are sick most of their lives or have other problems. And if you have any problem, if you suffer, you have to think about it. Think about karma first and think that I have created the cause for this suffering myself. For example, the sickness. Through experiencing the sickness, I am purifying this karma. And for this karma to become purified, I have to experience suffering. And in the end, it will be gone. This is how the Buddhas of the past have practiced too. So in this way, if you see suffering in this way, then suffering actually becomes like a stepping stone or a support for you to eliminate negativity and suffering, negative karma. It is through suffering that we transform, that we overcome our karma. And of course, that doesn't mean it will immediately be gone. We have to experience it. The illness has to slowly heal. And that is, and while we are healing, we experience suffering. But the experience of suffering in that sense is necessary, because it is through the experience that karma becomes purified. So when suffering is experienced, think of it in this way. Think that it is a good thing because I have to purify my karma. So the suffering becomes like a support in transforming, a transformative force that transforms my negative karma and afflictions, my negativities. So if you understand karma, you will see suffering in this way. And then as a result, you will actually not see suffering as a negative thing. You will see it as a good thing. So you understand then that the sentient beings in the 6 realms suffer, and at the root of their suffering are the 6 afflictive emotions. So now once you have understood that, you know that this is what I have to eliminate. I have to eliminate the afflictive emotions. And they are eliminated through karma ripening and our experience of suffering. And then the mind becomes completely purified. And so that is really the purpose of the Dharma. The purpose of Dharma is to transform. And as we undergo the transformation, it is painful. We experience a lot of suffering. So what needs to transform is the selfish mind, the mind wishing for one's own happiness. And it is transformed by wishing for the happiness of others. So this is how self-grasping slowly diminishes. And then we realize that there is actually no real self. The self that we have held on to doesn't actually exist. So the Buddha said that you just create this idea of a self, but there is no real self. You just think this is mine and that is mine, this is my body. And this body actually is a creation of such solidified thinking. So once we keep thinking me, and that solidifies into this material body. So the Buddha therefore said sentient beings are like ice blocks, and the ice block has to melt. So all suffering without exception comes from wishing for one's own happiness. The root of all suffering is self-grasping. The perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. So these are these 2 lines in the 37 practices. Through the altruistic mind, the ice block will slowly melt. And we experience suffering temporarily as the ice block is melting. The melting process is painful. And while we experience suffering, I recognize that actually this is a good thing. I'm actually purifying my karma and habitual imprints as I'm experiencing suffering. So the suffering is actually a positive, transformative force that helps me overcome my negativities. And then even if you are born in the 3 lower realms, it is also a healing process. So birth in the hell realms as a hungry spirit and in the animal realm is caused by attachment, hatred, and ignorance. And these habitual tendencies of thinking in this afflicted way have caused the mind to become like a solidified ice block that needs to melt. And it melts through experiencing suffering. And when we suffer, so that the melting experience, the melting of the ice block is a painful experience. But it purifies our karma. And eventually it will be cleared away. And then there is no more suffering in the end. So this is why you say that through suffering we actually achieve great happiness. For example, when you're sick and then you're healed, you find great joy just from because you have been healed. So through the suffering, the experience of suffering, you find happiness. So whatever your suffering in your life may be, think of it in this way. Think that this is my karma and now I'm purifying it. It has to become purified. And so that really is essentially the teachings of the Dharma. And that is why the Dharma is so precious, because it gives us a method to deal with our suffering and to purify our suffering, because we can recognize that all of our suffering comes from self-grasping. So if you really make an effort and you make it a point that by all means I will only think about others, how can I benefit others, then you yourself are melting your own ice block. The perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. So what is a perfect Buddha? What is enlightenment? It is the state where the ice block has melted into one with the ocean water. That means that one does not just disappear when attaining enlightenment. One just merges into one with all the other Buddhas, with the enlightened mind. And then once you are enlightened, you are able to help others. And so this is actually also how the Buddha had helped us attain enlightenment. Actually, the Buddha didn't do anything. Actually, we were the ones who attained enlightenment. The Buddha gave us the method with great kindness and told us with great love how we need to practice, but we were the ones who made the effort. We practiced, we attained enlightenment. The Buddha didn't do it for us. We melted our own ice block and it melted into the ocean. And so when you know that it's up to you, then you also know that that is something that can be accomplished. I can become a Buddha. And of course, until that is accomplished, one experiences suffering. But then again, who is responsible for that? It is yourself. And how did you do it? It is through self-grasping. Or all suffering without exception comes from wishing for one's own happiness. So simply put, never separate from the wish to benefit others. That's all you really need to know. That is the essence of the Dharma. That's also the essence of the 37 practices. And the 37 practices really represent the essence of all Dharma practice. There is no Dharma not included in there. And if you only understand that, there is nothing that you do not understand. So think very carefully about karma when suffering arises, and also see suffering as a way to attain great happiness. Finally, when one attains enlightenment, one achieves the great bliss that is without any suffering. There is no more suffering in the enlightened mind. Because there is no suffering in space. There is no more affliction. And that can be achieved. Suffering can come to an end. So that is now in response to someone, if you wonder that, can one really attain this state of great bliss that is without any suffering, like in an eternal way forever? It is something that one can actually attain. The answer is yes. There is a state that completely transcends all suffering that you can attain through your own effort. And so when you know that, you will gain some trust. You will think that I can actually attain that if I practice and make an effort. That state without suffering is something that I can actually attain. And so all of that is something that we can understand on the basis of the Buddha's teachings.
people nivati hakodro o dogi de chaking dogi de yapori de dogi de giva magiva pang giva double lang pi jinu je pang ye pi tap de tri ngodo de de dogi de ra ta chebore cha de dogi de sabji la da ko ja gi yore o de de lam tham che ge ning bo chun de dina ta ta ko de lo me pa so de lo me pa de tu dewa gun jogewa trot jogewa de tonge sumai de ta lang kari do lang dol manor pati lang joge lang tong go yore de na tonge tamse ge tonge de sang go ge le de pa sang go yore na sa da ta ro yore de ta ha ko de tonge ta ni zo ba so ta bi chu de nga tonge ji ta we ma na sa we ba ka ge ji ta we ma ma re yong ge yore yong wa de pi ma de do ba de pe na sa na oh, Rida Sandra Gina, Lindo Patri to was Changori, Nasa ba Tado, some the Dunga, the District Chashing, so the Dunga Tani is to watch by the young Yori. They don't get the pain the half or so, don't get the Jamariti, don't get it, they will lamb top of your minute. The data was some of them, Yaboret.
So we need to understand the two truths in this way then. And so first there's the relative truth, and the relative truth is the infallibility of karma, cause and effect. If you understand that very well, that is your best companion on the path. Comes your way. Of course, suffering is something that no one wants. And so obviously between good and bad we call it bad because it's something we don't want, otherwise we would want it. So we don't want to suffer, but actually we shouldn't quite see it in this way. Even though it's something undesirable, it also has a special quality, it has a special power, a transformative power which transforms our afflictive emotions or our negativities and karmas. So through the experience of suffering, we can find ways to practice, to give up non-virtue. We find ways to practice not harming others and accomplishing their benefit. So see it in this way. See that suffering is actually an important thing, a precious thing. And through suffering, through the experience of suffering, we also learn to hold on to love. And that is really the essence of all Dharma practice. So that is really the essence of the relative truth, the infallibility of karma, cause and effect. So in brief, you want to be happy, so practice virtue. You don't want to suffer, so give up non-virtue. That is the unmistaken path that the Buddha taught. And eventually, even if there is suffering, suffering will go away. Illnesses will heal. So it is also necessary to develop a patience that tolerates suffering, a patient endurance that tolerates accepts suffering. If you now sometimes people think that if you practice the Dharma, they think that through practicing the Dharma I will become free of all problems, all suffering, all sickness. But of course that's not the case. Things will happen. There will be sickness, there will be suffering, even if you practice the Dharma. But you see it in a different way. You don't see it as a negative thing. You see suffering as a necessary transformative force to purify your karma and negativities. And by seeing that, you develop this patient endurance that accepts suffering. Because you see that suffering also has a beneficial quality. Of course, it's something that we don't want, but it's also something that we can overcome by seeing it in this way. So ultimately, we can achieve a state that is free of all suffering. But by seeing suffering in this way, we can come to understand happiness. So basically, it is through the experience of suffering that we really begin to recognize what happiness actually is. So this is how we should think about it. We have 20 more minutes, and I have received 6 questions. I asked them. The first one is, can you explain what liberation upon sight means?
통돌 열어봐 통돌 통돌 열어봐 통돌 그 던다 가르리스
통돌들이 상계가 삼계가 모는 거 동다리 이 통회 줘봐 배배 줘봐 배배 줘봐 통돌 렉선 거리들이 조르들이 다디를 조르 상계가 막 보고 삼세요나 이 삼세되게 보게 동일 쪽 배대다 그래 통도들이 동일 쪽 이제 당디 총도를 사제가 삼제가 동을 가수 삼제 가수 당디 총도로 듣고 요래 통도들 배웅송만은 이제 심지 속차스가 통나들이 참아 피거리 될 피베 디바트가 있어서 피거리 오래지 심지가 동에 라가 동에 정말 심지 이는 같이 피나 라가 동에 된 차그럼냐도 쇼라고 요래 동대.
So the meaning of the liberation upon sight is that it is a visual representation of the Buddha's loving prayer for sentient beings. There's different kinds of liberation, for example, liberation upon sight, liberation upon hearing, or liberation upon touching, and so on, or thinking. So liberation is what are we liberated from? It is liberation from self-grasping. For example, when a mother loves her child, that she will be able to liberate or release this child's suffering. So through such a liberation upon sight, our self-grasping diminishes. It is actually through the power of the Buddha's great love for us that our self-grasping slowly diminishes. And so whoever sees this liberation upon sight, animals or humans, whoever sees this will be benefited. Their ice block will melt, and in this way their suffering will be slowly released. And so if you the Buddha benefited beings in this way, and so the more that you benefit others, the more you benefit sentient beings, the more your own ice block will melt. Next question. What is intention, and how and when to set intentions?
끈롱 세야디라 끈롱 열어 끈롱 세야디 가르리스 근데 끈롱 끈롱 스바나 장조선도 끈롱
끈롱 지가 이렇게 내가 가려지 제는 나의 최대이나 배는 시카드 답는데 나의 최대인데 그 말이甚至 피부 최대이자 그런데 이는 피부게 나의 최대에서 기와서 넘나데 니가 충거리 오甚至 피고 소만 보면 홍대는 배 잡치고 차로 요래 그런데 인피로 또또 용띠동 요래 인피로 또 제거래 말 피고서만 나한테들 대접냠도 요래 다 그때 나이도 막다 그래 또 나가 매वे나 그런 지와 가려 세기를 피고 또 뒤들이 받쳐배 말해 뒤 전부 차게 말했어.
So the intention is the purpose of whatever you do. So whatever you do, often we think that if I work, for example, I'm doing that for myself. For example, if you're like growing something in a field, like you're planting seeds in a field, then you might think that on benefit. That's an intention. So why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? And so the Buddhist intention is that we shouldn't do it for ourselves, but we should do it for others, or at least for self and others. Because if we just think about ourselves, and even though what we do might be virtuous, the power will not be really great. But on the other hand, if you have a true wish to benefit others and just recite a single Mani mantra, the benefit will be immeasurable. So the intention is really, it is true intention that we do anything that we do it with an intention of what is the purpose of us doing it. And so the purpose of practicing is to eliminate, purify self-grasping. And the intention that purifies that state of mind is a wish to benefit sentient beings. And that is something that we have to, in terms of when, we have to have continuously. Then it becomes very powerful.
말이 지하가 가라지 살아야 그래서 나시바 요 말이 혹과는 스브 차만 보여리 스브 탐지가 좋고요리 오 스브 탐지가 제도 싸가요 싸마더니 토탈 것들이 사템을 깔면 오 스브 탐지 대식 좀 보여리 콘솔아 내가 레이저 와가지고 스브라고 차들면이 오 대탑지 대식 좀 보여 그것도 샘 대식이 뭐지도 요리 그것도 사지가 저 요리스 오 코소를 피고 싸우들이 갈아살아 들이 나요 말 나대 체를 놓고 말 때 코소를 피고 요래 애들이 살려줘 요래 빼대다 그래.
And that's actually a very important point, speaking about the intention. So, for example, when we say that when you're eating food, you should eat your food with a good intention, an intention to benefit others. But you might wonder that, like, how can I do that? I'm just eating food. Like, how can I think that how does this benefit anybody else? So, first of all, it's not just you. This you who's eating food does not really exist. But actually your body is composed of millions of microorganisms, different life forms that are all within your body. So therefore, when you're eating food, you can think that I'm eating food to nourish them. And not just for me, this thought of me. I'm doing it for them, to feed them. So this is how you think from the Pratimoksha perspective and the Bodhisattva perspective. And then also next recognize that all these microorganisms are beings that possess Buddha nature. Only temporal due to karma, they are this microorganism, but really their mind possesses the cause of Buddhahood. They have Buddha nature. And I have to benefit them. If you eat with this intention, then you will not eat with a selfish mind and you will actually benefit them. That's actually also a way to transform them into the deity.
이제리 코 대식이 뭐요 옛날에 오 코소를 피고 싸는데 코소 담지 살이 저러고 요리 다다 사공 라이 저거지 저로 따바리 잘 살이 저러고 딱 나오 저 나다고 저 나오들 고소는 봤다는 나디네 고소 독을 저 나타되고 당시 나타를 저래 롱도 접아 베기섬 대선 노차시 당 목숨고 이 이들이 뒤에데 나디니 송을 나디 제 나사 막는 저거요 이피를 로를 대다 고소 참아사예는 저거요 베데다 그래 고소 이제리 우리 맞아봐 이제 결투고요 그래서 적세지계를 고소 멈춰망고들이 멋쩍들이 다도 고소 선물 멈춰 주인이들이 다도 베데다 평이요 결투고요 그래서 적세지 자치고 있어.
So everything depends on the way we see things. So these microorganisms in our body, they all possess Buddha nature. And when you eat food, you think that I eat food in order to benefit them. And then we've also said, if you eat food with that intention of bodhicitta, they all become the deity. So now when we practice the deity, we see we visualize ourselves as the deity. But then there's also the 100 peaceful and wrathful Buddhas that we say pervade that deity's body. And now these are actually all these beings throughout our body. But for as long as we cling to a self, they appear in forms that cause harm, that cause sickness. So then these microorganisms become harmful. So, for example, we say that the 3 kinds of disease are related to the 3 afflictive emotions. Wind, bile, and phlegm are connected to the afflictions of desire, hatred, and ignorance, which all arise out of self-grasping. So, in brief, because there is self-grasping, these microorganisms develop into forms that create more and more illness in our bodies. But that's because of self-grasping. And so therefore, if we cultivate an altruistic mind, they all become those Buddhas. Because the reason why we can transform them that way is because they do not inherently exist to begin with. It is said that there are 1,200,000 different forms of microorganisms or life forms throughout our bodies. And all of these hundreds of thousands of microorganisms are transformed if one person realizes the view. So if one person cultivates bodhicitta and realizes the nature of their mind, then all of these microorganisms will realize that together with that person, and they are benefited. So, and they can be benefited because they can be transformed through our intention, because they do not inherently exist to begin with. And so that is why the Buddha said it is so important that we cultivate bodhicitta.
남들에게 배타기에다 세대 왕저로나 다디 왕저로들이 세상도 차도 다 답을 투과도 다 강노노 제용을 삼티가 왕저로니 다 강피피들이 세대를 나서 봐 마도라서 삼보다 이 샘난게 세고 왕저로 저저때 라다 대인 가까이 오면 다디가 왕저로는 제차 말이 예비로 왕저로 사차도 우리 도보사지 예비선으로 세대께 계속 세다지죠 이제는 사제 세비 가까이 말이지.
For example, if one person wants to gain control of a country, for example, wants to overpower a country, if they try to do that with a selfish mind, then that will cause a lot of harm, because then the means that they will resort to are then inspired by hatred and jealousy. And then whatever they do will be very harmful to the people. But if someone tries to control a country with love, then that will create a country of peace and happiness, democracy, and so forth. And so the same is true for our mind. It's just it depends on our state of the mind. We can be both. Therefore, we always say that the gods or the evil spirit or demons, gods or demons are actually not separate. It's one mind that could be either one. So when the mind is controlled by self-grasping, then it's a demon. And if that mind is a mind of altruism, then it becomes the deity. The perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. The mind may change momentarily. So on the ground, fundamentally, Buddhas and sentient beings are not separate. How can one develop a strong practice of Tonglen, taking and giving?
Tonglen 그냐면 여러분 Tonglen 그냐면 이 야포냐면서 도바 가르치고 그랬어.
오, 이 삼바 재미지 거래. 삼바 재미지 오늘들이 대화다 제베죠. 제베 삼대로 소소 삼대 제보구나. 삼대에서 정말 되고 삼대에 파트바다 냠들이 세피에 담지 나디니 정서 나디 담지라는 certain성 삼 대들이 돈이 제일 되는 라게 다가도 세피 담지를 이제 대시 좀 보이고 그래서 차로라고 내가 차송다데 삼바 재미되다. 돈이 삼바 재미지는 다 돈이랑 이게 요거요래. 되는 이게 요거래. 되는 그래서 이제 동의기든 통로들 다 그게 뭐 째그래. 동의 초기요래. 이게 게 제일 말이 돈이 이제 삼바 재미가 없는 이게 냠도 요거요래지.甚至 동의 초저되다. 깨었다 되래. 돈이 맞지는 생각. 잡을 강도 동의를 때 랑상들이 소소 놓은 거요래. 동의들 랩요거요래. 대적하려고 다 대결을 벌여서 들어가게 용용 뭐한테 매바땅 대들 고소라 저것도 페이서 그요래.
So for a strong practice of Tonglen, you need to cultivate immeasurable love, which is the cause of all happiness. So when great love arises in you, then think that may I be able to give all this love to all beings. I want to give this love to all beings. And then together with that, think that, and may all the self-clinging of sentient beings come to me and dissolve within my love. May it all be gone for them. And also think that all sentient beings possess Buddha nature. Just temporarily, they appear like an ice block. If you only cultivate immeasurable love, actually the practice of Tonglen will happen on its own. If immeasurable love arises, immeasurable compassion will follow naturally. And for example, a sign of having cultivated immeasurable compassion is that when you see the suffering of another sentient being, it will get to you. So you will feel that it will make you feel their suffering. That's because of compassion. So compassion arises naturally after love has already arisen. And then Tonglen actually occurs on its own. So again, a sign of that, a sign of having cultivated immeasurable love and compassion for beings is that when you hear, for example, there's of the suffering of anyone in the world, that suffering really comes to you, really gets to you, and you feel their suffering. You immediately feel very affected by their suffering. But then also you recognize, so where does this suffering come from? The cause are the afflictive emotions. And so then by passing that on, that the cause is the afflictive emotion, so you have to abandon the afflictive emotions, then you're also benefiting them on the basis of the cause.
이제 동안은 그 초를 대 맞춰버리지 너 이제 동에 쌈고당 이제 동에 생고 초월래 다들 문제는 게 대표용 전보래지 생고 초월래 버래. And
the real practice of Tonglen is when you when immeasurable love arises, then you are naturally giving away this love. You're giving love to others. And then, so for example, when you see a being that suffers, then you will feel their suffering, and it comes to you. And why do you feel their suffering? It's because you love them. So you also then recognize that the root of their suffering is self-grasping, so you want to take that away from them. So the way Donglen happens just by doing that is that through love, because you love that being, your love goes out to them. And then because your love goes out to them, you feel their suffering. And that is compassion. So then through compassion, you give, through love, you give your love, and through compassion you take. So you love and you give them your love, and with compassion you take on their suffering, because you feel compassion comes to you. So the point is that for real Donglen to be practiced, that a real feeling of other people's suffering has to come to you.
다들 파스함제 레비티들이 저처럼 데려 동네라고 해. 데려는 와도 쉽지 탐제 잡을 동에 촌나 잡을 약간 강력 동네요나 랍작티 동네에 촌로 오다들 얘기요래. 데리를 가래리 거기서 필적과 삼제 레비티게 거기서 내가 나지를 해박자 상교래. 문에 팽기요래. 저 리지세 다 동네에서 데리지. 라고 삼제를 데리지 무슨 용거래. 이 상계가 동네에서 삼제 매는 용거 말아. mấy chữ bố nào thì nó càng sao của mày sao thế mày nó bố sao mà bố tiền nào những cái sao ta chỉ động lý rồi làm sao nhắm được động lý gì nhắm được cái nó cái cho được lên cái rồi.
And so the actual practice of Tonglen is something that we really should understand. So for example, if you have a child, you love your child very much, then your child gets sick. If your child gets sick, then that's even worse for you than yourself getting sick. It's because you love your child so much that you feel their suffering in such a way that you rather be sick yourself than them being sick. And so that then is applied to other people. So, for example, if you hear about the suffering in another country, or somebody is sick and so forth, immediately, when you hear about that, you feel that it comes to you, and you feel their suffering. It feels just like your child is being sick. That is when you're taking suffering. So this is how you actually benefit beings through the practice of Tonglen, because you're giving them love, and that purifies their karma, their self-grasping, and that actually benefits them. So the practice of Tonglen has to become a real feeling, something that you experience. It won't happen if you don't feel anything. If you hear about someone is suffering and you don't really think much about it, then Tonglen will not happen. So first there has to be love that you give away to them. Just like when you're a child, when you think about your child. But then often when we think about other people's children, then we feel nothing, just if it's our own child. But so you take the feeling for your own child, and then that compassion then goes out to others, and when you hear of their suffering, then the feeling of their suffering actually comes to you. That's the actual practice of Tonglen. Yeah, so since we are out of time, Rinpoche says if you have more questions, also Khenpo, Tenzin can answer them. You can ask Khenpo Tenzin and Khenpo Tubsang both.
Oh,
This form of Chenrezig here in this image is called Chenrezig, King of Space. And this the name occurs in the collected works of the King Songtsen Gampo.
Please stay for just a few announcements. Thank you.